Okay, hello everybody. I am so excited to be here again. Welcome, welcome. This is part two of our music information literacy book launch. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I am running comms for Library Juice Press and Academy, and we'll say just a couple of things about us as an organization and some of the things that we're up to before I pass this over to our exciting panel. So we are Library Juice Press. We publish books related to librarianship, mostly theoretical and practical issues from a critical perspective, with an audience for active working librarians and students in LIS. We are an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can find more at litwinbooks.com. See more about all the wonderful titles coming out, everything coming up, and more of these book talks that we have happening almost all the time. In addition to all the books that are coming out, we're also very proud to host two academic journals. So we have the Journal of Critical Library and Information Studies, as well as the Journal of Critical Digital Librarianship. So do definitely take a look at those if you're interested in the happenings of the fields from a critical angle. And of course, if you write on those topics, I hope you'll be in touch about publishing with us. You can stay in touch in any number of ways. We are on all the places you like to scroll. We're on Blue Sky and Mastodon and Facebook and Instagram. We're on YouTube where all of these videos will appear. So do take a look at that. We also run Library Juice Academy, which offers a large range of online continuing education courses for those of us in information studies and information sciences writ large. We've got a lot of great courses happening all the time, starting in April and May. We've got just a couple of samples here, which I think overlap a little bit with this topic, including online instructional design, introduction to scholarly communications, introduction to collection development, curriculum mapping, information literacy for academic librarians, and inclusive instructional design. But you can see all of those and much more at libraryjuiceacademy.com. That's everything I wanted to say. I'm going to stop sharing and now let the panelists talk. I'm so excited to hear this. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It really means a lot to us that we're able to do this and share our work. It's important. So, music information literacy, inclusion, and advocacy was born from a significant paradigm shift in our country. But let me back up a little bit first. I first edited Ideas, Strategies, and Scenarios in Music Information Literacy, which was published in 2018. And so much of that book was conceived and written in the early stages of the ACRL framework. And that was a very rich time of change and brought about new skills that moved information literacy away from competency standards to a more complex set of core concepts associated with meta-literacy and cognition. This book was born out of another significant shift. The last decade's events have increased public awareness around issues of DEIJ, and additionally, our understanding of issues that surround systemic racism and gender beyond the binary has been heightened. Becoming a more equitable librarian is an ongoing process, and it's only natural that there is a refocus in the ways that librarians teach and assist students after any kind of large cultural paradigm shift. This process is the space where critical information literacy overlaps with self-reflection as a librarian and a deep understanding that our students, our faculty, and our colleagues have identities and experiences that influence how they navigate their world.
That was Kathy Abromeit. I'm Dyani Sabin. We're the co-editors of this volume. We always forget that. As we thought about the overall structure of the book, we came up with three main concepts or sections that we wanted represented. The first part of the book, Critical Theories, Concepts, and Reflections, offers a philosophical overview of society and culture to attempt to reveal, critique, and challenge power structures. As librarians, we encourage practices that allow us to operate in a way that embraces awareness of the social, political, and cultural relationships in which our library users reside. Today, you'll hear from Lynn Gullickson Spencer on her chapter, Trauma-Informed Information Literacy. In addition, you'll hear from Charles Roush and Katrina Roush discussing education equity, music theory, information literacy at a Hispanic-Serving institution, HSI. The second section, bringing underrepresentation to the forefront, is about visibility. It's driven by the lived experiences of its authors and the importance of making both space in library instruction and in physical library spaces for a diverse population of users and librarians. Today, Patrick Quinn and Marcy Cohen will discuss music library instruction for ESOL students, followed by Kathy Abromeit, who will talk about her chapter, Stop Being a Fatphobe, bringing a larger conversation to critical information literacy. The third section, Supporting Activism, is largely about expanding and supporting activism within the system of the library itself. Kristi Bergland will talk about digital accessibility in music libraries, designing your way to user success. And Joel Roberts will share about his chapter, Identifying and Overcoming Bias in Library Discovery Systems. Now, the examples in the book are music because that's Kathy's discipline, but one could think of this as a case study and apply the assessments and approaches honestly to any discipline. There is kind of a universal design appeal when you step out of the mode of the music librarian. The issues of visibility, awareness, and comfort are all practices that can be applied in any library context or really any public services field. There is an element of existing as the other that allows for greater comfort for anyone who is marginalized. And being intentional about trying to open your space, it makes a bigger difference than most people realize. I think one of the big takeaways of this book is that it is so important to try. Even if you're not sure you're doing something perfectly, it's the act of trying to create inclusive spaces that builds a lot of community value. We have been so privileged to work with such amazing authors on this. They are truly walking the walk and doing the hard work. And we're excited to introduce you to Lynn Gullickson Spencer.
Thank you, Dyani. So yes, I'm Lynn, and today I will be sharing about why trauma-informed information literacy is important to me. Kathy asked if I would write a chapter on the social, behavioral, and emotional challenges involved in information literacy. Since I had been working as a psychotherapist with a trauma specialization in the Chicagoland area, I suggested writing about these concerns from a trauma-informed perspective. I was also in the middle of moving and other life transitions, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to work with my friend and co-author, Leanne Vandercreek, who is the Associate Dean of Public Services at Northern Illinois University Libraries. Leanne had worked as a social worker before shifting to academic librarianship, and we had co-edited The Psychology of Librarianship, also published by Library Juice Press. Thankfully, Leanne agreed to join me on this project, although unfortunately she is unable to be with us today. In hopes of increasing the understanding of trauma and its impact, we dedicated our chapter to the memories of all the dear colleagues and students who left us too soon. These losses served as the foundation of why trauma-informed information literacy is important to us. This approach is a part of care pedagogy. Our primary focus is to explain how this strategy provides a flexible foundation for the success of all students, supports the mental health of all students, advances diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and justice, and reduces stigma. We maintain that students cannot learn until they feel safe physically, emotionally, and intellectually. We discussed how trauma manifests in individual contexts and more incrementally in systemic contexts. Some examples include sexual assault, microaggressions, racism, transphobia, and sexism. Cumulative trauma is correlated with higher percentages of adverse adjustment in college students. Sadly, the connection between discrimination and trauma is not discussed often enough on college campuses. Leanne and I assert that trauma-informed pedagogy may be a piece of the complex solution. We explored the social, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral impacts of trauma. Research has demonstrated the cognitive effects of trauma, which includes difficulties with lack of focus, learning new information, and retaining old information. We also examined how the ACRL framework already supports trauma-informed pedagogy, which situates the learner in the driver's seat, if you will. In addition, we identified instruction priorities, such as the individual characteristics of students, the content and context of what is taught, assignment requirements, instructor and student behavior, and classroom characteristics. In 2014, Janice Corello and Lisa Butler had already proposed a case for trauma-informed pedagogy. They reported that 66 to 85% of college students already had some kind of trauma history. When we began writing, the world was early in the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic, so fresh traumas were still occurring. We had all experienced a profound loss of connection when the pandemic shut down the world in March 2020. Academic libraries in the US were in varying stages of reopening their buildings to faculty, staff, and students. This reality made it even more essential to think critically about how librarians would engage in teaching students with new and pre-existing trauma histories, which had escalated exponentially because of other societal factors as well. Ensuring safety, establishing trustworthiness, maximizing choice and collaboration, and prioritizing empowerment in classrooms provide students with stability, a sense of agency, and connection. While pre-pandemic statistics about the high rates of trauma histories among college students were already compelling enough to make us consider how trauma-informed information literacy might be valuable, the current environment demands a pedagogical paradigm shift that prioritizes the well-being of all students. Unfortunately, trauma is still occurring every day in every part of the world. Climate change is considered a second pandemic, creating existential crises for many young people in particular. In 2025, we find people who hold one or more marginalized identities under attack as diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and justice initiatives are being eliminated at an alarming rate. Time will tell how many of these assaults on the civil rights of many of our students will hold up under the ongoing challenges, but serious harm is already occurring while their humanity is debated in the public square. The educational impact will transform higher education in perpetuity, so the need for specialized pedagogy in all disciplines and at all levels has only intensified. I'm grateful and honored to have participated in this amazing project. I hope today's participants will take the time to engage in reading the entire book and reflecting on the questions within as we continually strive to do better for our students. Next, I'm happy to introduce you to Charles, Katrina, and Norma, who will be talking about their work on education equity at a Hispanic-serving institution.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. So my name is Charlie Roush. I'm a librarian at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And Katrina Roush is a music theory professor on the music faculty. And we worked on this project. I think the idea came from when we moved down to the Rio Grande Valley in 2018 to start our jobs at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. We're a fairly new institution. Right around 2015, the legacy institutions of UT Pan American and UT Brownsville were dissolved and then merged as a new university, University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And when we moved, we were extremely sensitive, aware of the fact that we were moving to a place we really didn't know a lot about. We're both from the Midwest. We grew up in Indiana and Ohio. And so we knew we'd be working with students that, we had a few folks in our area that had a Hispanic background or heritage, but in the Valley, we're talking like over 90% of the people identify as Hispanic, and that's reflected in our student population as well. So when we say Hispanic serving institution, we're quite a large example of that type of institution, because I know there's sort of a threshold or a makeup of what qualifies somebody to become a Hispanic serving institution, but that's like the vast majority of the people in our community and the students we work with all day long. And so we wanted to learn about our population. We wanted to learn about our students. We wanted to not just bring our Midwestern perspectives and how to approach music and how to approach being in college. And I think the other nugget that sort of stuck with us for this chapter was when we moved down to the Valley, a lot of folks quickly were willing to share and help us acclimate or prepare for the fact that our students maybe didn't have as many opportunities as students we'd worked with in the past. Maybe somebody didn't own a musical instrument or didn't have private lessons in their past to bring as a foundation for their music studies. Or maybe it was that high schools were underfunded, or maybe it's just the fact that the region, there's such a prominence of low-income households and families. And those are all extremely important things to know about. But it made Katrina and I, and actually Danae also in our group, it just made us uneasy that was the first thing, the most emphasized thing we were learning about the students down here. And I think everyone was well-intentioned. I think there are no like bad actors in all of this, but it just got us to thinking, there's so much more to anyone than all of that. And if you start explaining someone by what they're lacking, it maybe skews the whole thing in just a wrong light. And so we did a little looking about what that is. And so we came up with the idea of deficit thinking is something that people research out there. We heard of it, but didn't know a lot about it. So we started exploring that a little bit. And that became a major lens that we used to talk about what we were trying to do in this chapter and the work we do in the Valley. So the idea of learning about deficit thinking and how to combat it, other ways to approach pedagogy and teaching, as well as our librarian and music theory backgrounds, sort of brought everything together for the chapter. And I'll pass it off to Katrina at this point to talk about some more of the specifics of how we approach things.
Yeah, so like Charlie said, we started doing a little more research into some of these ideas. And we realized that there are a lot of educational philosophies that actually help dismantle deficit thinking, but also are just good educational philosophies, which we found encouraging that just in the field of education, there are a lot of things that are thought of as good pedagogy that also help with this problem that we were facing. So in the chapter that we wrote for this book, we talk about 3 specific educational philosophies. We talk about learner-centered pedagogy, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and translingual pedagogy. We felt that all 3 of these had a focus on the assets that students bring instead of their deficits, and also their individuality instead of thinking of them as like a group like our Hispanic students, but that each one is unique and has something special about them. So in the chapter, we explain the application of these pedagogies in Music Theory 1 course that I teach every spring. Charlie and I had previously built a semester-long scaffolded group project. So there's 6 steps assignments throughout the semester that lead up to a final culmination in an analysis project that they turn in at the end of the semester. And some of the steps involve library use and information literacy in various ways. Charlie comes into the class at 3 different points during the semester to give library instruction. One of those is a full day where we actually go visit the library and let the students see the stacks and what we have to offer for musicians. And the other 2 are actually really short sessions where he just comes into the classroom for 15 minutes at the beginning. And we find that to work really well. But it's nice that students get that instruction over the course of the semester. So we started doing this our first spring semester, the first time I taught this course at UTRGV, which was the spring of 2019. But since then, and as we've done more research specifically for this chapter and for other projects we've been doing, we've really changed the way that the project works, and we've had a much more of a focus on not only information literacy and just general library skills, but also on letting students know that we value their backgrounds and that we value their cultures and their linguistic differences as well. And so we've really, I think, improved the project because of the research that we've done. So the current version of the project is how we explain it in the chapter, and it really does have a focus on teaching students that we value them and we value who they are as individuals, and that we think that they bring a lot to offer, because these are generally freshmen. So we want to tell them right away in college that we think that they are have a lot that they bring. The topics that in this chapter are really near and dear to our hearts. We work in such a unique area of the country, and our students have a lot of potential, and we really love working with them. Like the students are the reason that we have our jobs, that we want our jobs. And so we want to give them the best education possible, but also show them that we value them and show them that they should value themselves, and that their unique familial, cultural, and linguistic backgrounds are extremely valuable, and that they should be proud of that. So our co-author, Norma Danae Debrell, she was unable to join us today, but I just wanted to mention she's not a librarian, nor is she a musician, but she works in the first year writing program at UTRGV, and she actually grew up here in this area, and she taught high school here for a while. So her insights were really valuable to us as we were thinking about who our students are, what they go through, and what it's like for them to live here. And so that was really, really insightful for us. And so now I believe, is it Marcy and Patrick going next? Okay, so I'll hand it off to Marcy and Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Ooh, I'm a little blown out here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to be talking about this book and this chapter that Marcy and I put together. We, at the time of writing, we were both working at Boston University, and we're working very closely with a particular professor and his first year writing course that was an ESOL specific section. It was titled Boston Jazz. And so we worked with him over several years, very closely intertwined with his curriculum and throughout the entire semester to help support his class and his students throughout. And there were a couple of things that we noticed and learned along that process that we felt was important to share in a sort of case study. So our chapter was very much informed by the fact that at the time, I believe, and still is, Boston University is one of the top 10 institutions with the highest international student population. I think right now, World News has it at 6th, with 22% of the population being international students. So this is a really, really important part of our landscape. I think since then, it's actually grown up to 22%. So we're seeing this trend continuing in higher ed, and even with some of the challenges of approaching a music instruction course, music instruction for a course that is not specifically with musicians and people with musical background. We also had an issue of people not coming from the same language and cultural background as we are here in the United States. So we kind of divided the chapter into two different portions. We have one portion that talks about the theory and a lot of the findings that we had on a larger scale, along with some more specific suggestions and instances that might be helpful. Things like making sure you're using very neutral language and avoiding highly specialized language knowledge. Things such as citation being a word that's used for multiple different things outside of the library as well. And trying to avoid local colloquialisms. Since we're up in the Boston area, obviously wicked is the big one for us. But trying to avoid a an assumption of knowledge, especially when it comes to cultural knowledge. One of the big things in music, obviously, around the turn of the 20th century and throughout the 20th century is the Great American Songbook. But we can't be sure that our students who are coming from these different cultures are necessarily knowledgeable in this. Then you also have the issues of different levels of understanding of English as a language. Some students are coming in, this is their first time. This was a freshman year writing course, so this is their first time working with an American institution, sometimes the first time working with an English speaking institution, and they're a little unsure. Other times we're having international students who came and finished their schooling here in the United States before moving on to university and have a much greater proficiency in English. So you have kind of this stratified classroom that you need to make sure you're working with to make sure everyone's on the same level throughout. So those are some of the things that we talk about in the first half of the chapter, just to really focus in on what we can do going forward and the lessons that we had learned. But the second part, we take you through the kind of curriculum that we developed for the entire course. We have at the time we had 3 different class meetings with the students. We had one that was very much an introductory one. We would take them through the library, introduce them to the space itself, some of the systems that we use, like Library of Congress and how to navigate it, how to read a Library of Congress call number, some basics of how to find things in the collection if you're browsing, such as the majority of the journals and periodicals will be in the ML1 and 5 section area. And then take them through some basics of searching and understanding the internet portion of the library, the part that they will often be working with the most. In this particular course, the different assignments would focus eventually toward a student-focused assignment, a student-developed topic. So we would work with them on understanding how to develop a topic and understanding the basics of researching around that topic, modifying your topic as you go along, and then kind of close the session after the first one. So the first one is a very standard kind of welcome to the library, this is what we can do sort of session. And it's in the second and third especially that we really focus a little bit more on that multicultural understanding of music and how we can create those connections in a classroom that is so broad in its experience. We had students that would be from Eastern Asia, from South America, Central America, Caribbean nations, African nations, Indian subcontinent, all over the world in just one classroom. And when you're dealing with that breadth of cultural knowledge and understanding, even of American concepts, for a class that is centered around jazz in the city of Boston, you get some really, really interesting topics that that really tickle that reference part of my brain, to be honest. But yeah, I think I can turn it over to Marcy for the last couple parts of the remaining parts of our chapter there.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And it's always a pleasure to work with you. I first want to give a shout out to one of the audience members here, Holly Makovic, who Patrick and I both worked with in the music library at Boston University. I kind of inherited this class from Holly, so she had been taking the lead on it, and she turned the reins over to me, which was where we developed this curriculum. And then Patrick was in a paraprofessional role at the time, and Holly greatly encouraged Patrick to get involved, to bring in his own perspective on it, and to use this as I hate to say it this way, but a resume building experience so that he could get more experience working with students. So as Patrick was saying, the third session, by that point, the students had generally developed their research topics, and we were very fortunate to be working with a faculty member who happens to be married to an academic librarian. So he has the insider knowledge of what works well, which is why he had his students come in 3 times, not just a one shot. And that final session was very much focused on one-on-one help with the students. We would go around the classroom, talk to each student. What is your research topic? What have you found so far? How have you tried to research this? and then working with them one-on-one, trying to find resources, in some cases saying, that's a really great topic, but we don't have the resources to support doing research on this. So maybe having to steer them, but also like making a note in our collection development parts of our brains about this is where we need to build out our collections because this is where the student interest is. And the great thing about all the work that we've done around library instruction for ESOL students is when we started putting together our first presentation on it, we were drawing heavily on our firsthand experience, but it also forced us to, like, I don't know, forced us. It also provided the encouragement, I think would be a better way to phrase it, to go out and check what research had been done, what papers have already been written about this. And learning things like, for some, there are cultural barriers that they are unfamiliar with American library systems where you can borrow materials, you can take them with you. So we would explain that to students in case it wasn't obvious. We learned that we should rephrase things, saying things like, you can borrow this, you can take it with you. Two different ways of saying the same thing. If they don't comprehend one, they might comprehend the other. And one of the things that was mind-blowing to me was that it didn't make sense that Library of Congress call numbers are called call numbers, but they start with a letter. So when I explain to students about this, I use a metaphor of a street address that tells you exactly where something is, and I would recite the street address of our library that tells you exactly where to find this, before then going into the specific structure of call numbers. So it was really gratifying. And to go back to a little bit of what Charles and Katrina were talking about, we didn't have a deficit mindset. We were recognizing that these students have different knowledge from what we have, not less knowledge, and as much as possible tried to tap into what they already know, because these are smart kids and they may not know everything about American library systems and how to do research, but they know a lot of other things that are beyond my own knowledge. Patrick, anything else you want to add before we toss it to the next person?
That really covered everything. Thank you so much, Marcy. And yeah, I do want to echo my praise and thanks to Holly Makovic for letting me, encouraging me as a paraprofessional to step into a very instructional role, which was, I recognize looking back, was very uncommon. Really helped me get my footing, and I feel helped me start my career very strongly. I think the only thing that I'd add is, that some of the topics that these students came up with were truly some of the most interesting things that we've tackled. And it's not uncommon for students to want to research something that is very new and very fresh of mind, but might not have much in the way of scholarly research. In the same way that Marcy talked about, it would help us think about what we would need for acquisitions. It really did help expand our collection beyond the Western canon, which is another kind of side benefit, I would say. It really helped us move away from Western classical as the one and only basis for our collection. So that's all I would add to that, I think. And next, I think we'll pass it over back to Kathy.
No, I think we're going to Kristi Bergland, directly to Kristi.
My mistake.
To Kathy next.
Kathy, is it you?
Yeah, I think it's me.
Okay.
Are you all seeing my slide?
No, we are not.
Okay, let's try again. How about there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm sharing this work today that I did with my collaborator, Grace Elliott, and Grace is unable to be here today. So I'll be presenting for both of us. We in music libraries have advocated for many social justice issues, and yet still fatphobia as a matter of social justice is often overlooked. Fat people are blamed for their weight with the commonly held justification that the individual just needs to adopt healthier behaviors. And unlike other discriminatory practices, there's no specific legal protection against weight discrimination. Fatism is identified by many as an acceptable prejudice, and creating a fat-friendly or body-positive instructional space in the library starts with the librarian's self-awareness. On a personal level, this is an issue I have been thinking about and dealing with my entire life. So in 2000, when I was working as a librarian, I was serving on the diversity committee at my home library, and I asked if I could do a presentation for the staff on fat phobia. So I did the presentation under the title, "A Waste is a Terrible Thing to Mind, Creating a Bias-Free Environment." And I want to tell you that the other title I was considering was Fat is Not a Four-Letter Word, Creating a Bias-Free Environment. And I just want to put a pin in that second title option because we're going to come back to that. Anyhow, I felt really good about the presentation. There was a lot of discussion, and it was a very positive experience, and I felt so hopeful. And then I got back to my office, and I received my first hate mail. And this is an email that I received from a colleague. To Kathy Abromeit, "Oh, please. How about sensitivity training for people who take care of their health so all their money can go for people who pig out even though it ruins their hearts, their blood pressure, their pancreas, and that's just for starters? How about helping people who watch their furniture get cracked under morbid weight when they're trying to be polite? How about people who pick up the slack for people who are huffing and puffing because they need all their energy just to drag their weight around, or because they're tired from making a midnight run to the store to spend some quality time with a gallon O hot fudge sauce and Cheese Whiz? Please draw the line in your diversity workshops. Some conditions in life cannot be altered. Who has time to deal with people who self-destruct? What next? Hug a smoker?" Well, as you can imagine, I was really crushed. And I kept thinking about how I wished my colleague had thought more about what they were saying and that they had challenged their bias. And so to that end, one of the things that Grace and I decided we really needed to include was a bias assessment in the chapter. So on the screen, you're seeing a shortened version of a longer assessment that was in the book. To combat these issues, neutralizing language and experiences where white bias could occur are key. And in her book, What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon defines fat as a neutral descriptor for predominantly plus-size people. She asserts that terms like large, big, and overweight all imply that there's a set of ideal standards, that we're left wondering, larger than what? Bigger than who? Or what number is acceptable? So creating a neutral expectation of size as a descriptor instead of a character judgment can disarm some of the harm of weight bias. In libraries, archives, and special collections on campuses have the incredible resources to offer students. However, weight bias can often impact those spaces. When seeking information through library resources, subject headings, and controlled vocabularies, and I suspect that a lot of this will circle to what Joel is going to be talking about today too, not specifically about fat phobia, but about search hierarchies. We impose a fat-phobic lens on our users, forcing users to search with undesirable terms to find information on fat-related subjects. So this example that I'm showing on the screen is titled "Large Woman in Shift Playing Lobbed Double Bass with Machine Heads on the Floor." And you notice that the description of the photograph identifies the subject as, quote, a heavy-set woman. Well, no other photographs in the collection identify their subjects by their body type. We all know that representation matters, and so one thing we offer in this chapter is profiles of several musicians that you can highlight in your instruction sessions. And we, of course, we know we need to be inclusive in our teaching, and fat musicians are no exception to that. Another section in the chapter that we get asked about frequently is furniture and the physical space. The furniture in our libraries is the first indication of who we welcome and who we want to use our facilities. And we send a message that if you can't fit into our seating, you're the problem. Additionally, uncomfortable seating can tell library users they won't succeed. We offer suggestions for furniture and creating welcoming spaces. And we need to create a learning environment that embraces all bodies, discusses fatphobic metadata, and recognizes that size is no indication of credibility, discipline, knowledge, or competency. So I want to circle back to my the title from my talk in 2000 that I didn't use, and that's that title, Fat is Not a Four-Letter Word, Creating a Bias-Free Environment. So as Dyani and I were marketing this book idea and we were sending out proposals, we sent the proposal for our book to one publisher, and that particular publisher emailed me back and said that they had a lot of trouble with the fat phobia chapter. In particular, that was the issue with the book. And they went so far as to say, well, to ask whether or not we could even use that word. Like the word fat was a four-letter word. And with that, Dyani and I were just like, okay, we need to seek a different publisher who is more progressive. And of course, the first publisher that came to mind who is willing to deal with those really difficult issues and those kinds of biases head on was Library Juice Press. So clearly this is a publisher who doesn't shy away from those hard conversations. So I'd like to end with a huge shout out to Library Juice Press for doing the amazing work and being willing to take on these hard topics. And now you're going to hear from Kristi Bergland and her work on digital accessibility in music libraries.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, I'm Kristi Bergland, and I wrote a chapter called Digital Accessibility in Music Libraries, Designing Your Way to User Success. Accessibility has been a lot more talked about lately, and there's the ADA Title II mandate coming up for public institutions in just over a year that certainly digital documents will need to be accessible. But I think there's the understanding that fostering a culture of inclusion and equitable access is an investment in the success of everyone in the library user community. And we know as librarians, this is what we do. We provide access to the cool stuff. So we want to make sure that we are making that as possible and as easy and equitable as it can be. Kathy and Dyani had asked us to include a quote at the beginning of our chapters, which I thought was just a really cool idea that sort of inspired or encapsulated the spirit of our chapter. And mine was a quote from the late, great Minnesota Senator Paul Wellstone, which is, "We all do better when we all do better." And I think that is kind of a cornerstone of digital accessibility, because a lot of what I talk about in the chapter and accessibility concepts is not just an accommodation for people who might have limited vision, or, it doesn't help one tiny segment of the population. It helps everyone. And we know that people have different learning styles and not everyone processes information the same way, but this can create barriers to equitable access to knowledge building and library resources. So the chapter aims to build a basic awareness of the practical issues of accessibility, to understanding current terminology, and to identify tools and useful design resources that will go a long way in achieving equitable access, as well as a deeper understanding of user needs of all users. This chapter focuses on understanding the range of contexts and needs that users face. And the tools, many of these tools are extremely simple that libraries can use to enable, enhance, and expand information retrieval for all users, rather than using ableist deficit-based thinking around accommodating disability, which is limiting and obscures the situational needs that all users have on occasion. Although the chapter does include some context for readers on the concepts of permanent, temporary, and situational disability. So with a central focus on web accessibility and document design, this chapter aims to encourage broader discussion of music librarians' roles and responsibilities, and to recast accessibility issues around the ideas of agency and empowerment. As music librarians in a variety of positions and roles, we're all creating documents, we're all creating and interacting with digital environments. And many of us deal with faculty and other library workers, other library users. So empowering ourselves to be good resources and kind of stewards of this information, where it can sort of be a softer point of first contact for, for example, faculty who've just been told that all of their resources in Canva have to be accessible, and there's nobody in their department that does that. You can be the person to say, okay, this isn't as daunting a task as you think, and, start the conversation from there. And anyway, so there's a section on unpacking accessibility, talking about the types of four main types of barriers that face music library users in the digital space: audio, visual, technological, and comprehensibility. And this is to provide some context and background, and accommodations and accessibility requirements. So we know that making information accessible is the core work of the librarian and always has been. So I take a little time to look at accommodation versus accessibility and what this might look like specifically in music library contexts. As Kathy was talking about in her chapter, her and Grace's chapter, about the metadata in the photograph description, and, looking at that language, and also, alt text and descriptive text, what that looks like, what that might look like in your library webpage, and different contexts. So then the chapter talks a bit about universal design for learning, also known as UDL for short, and Gestalt theory. Universal design for learning basically helps ensure that, just in brief, because I know we want to hear from Joel also, ensures that all learners have access to the same information. Gestalt theory helps to ensure that that information is presented in ways that make sense to the learner, which can help improve understanding and retention of information. So then I include a list of recommendations that are informed by both UDL and Gestalt theory, to to address a wide range of barriers and usability and comprehension in the music library, and talk about both, what not to do and what can be done better. So this covers things like accessibility statements, using plain language, how to check your work through online accessibility checkers, keyboard navigation, using a style sheet and template, font choices, scalability, alignment, images and media, then alt text, transcriptioning and captioning, and some music captioning conventions, contrast, headings in documents and heading tags, using links and better ways to use links, lists, and tables. So just to sum up, even though accessibility is often framed around disability, it's not necessarily even something to just be seen as an accommodation, but a way to present your library resources in a way that improves the experience of anyone who's going to encounter them. So with that, I will turn it over to Joel, who I believe is going to discuss his work on identifying and overcoming bias in library discovery systems.
Thank you, Kristi. Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Roberts. I'm the music librarian at the University of Memphis. This project, when Kathy put out the call for proposals for this project a few years back, it coincided with the time when I had just started working with the colleague I co-wrote this chapter with, Leslie Colley, who is no longer at the University of Memphis, but her research agenda was bias in discovery systems. And so when this call came out, it kind of got me thinking about working on a project related to this. I'll admit that as a music librarian whose main area is reference and instruction, a lot of my understanding of bias as it pertains to the study of music, I just always sort of assumed related to the fact that the study of music over time has historically been kind of biased, right? It's been very male-centric, Eurocentric. I was always reminded as a young student who as an undergraduate was studying jazz, I remember, even when we were talking about non-male-centric Western music, sometimes, I don't know if anyone's ever heard this statement, but I remember I used to hear all the time that jazz was America's one true art form, or America's one original art form. And whereas I used to sort of think that, oh, that's kind of cool. Over time, kind of began to realize that while that's a compliment, it's sort of a slight at other American art forms, because there have been other forms of music that originated in the United States, blues, country, we could go on and on. But what that comment is saying is jazz is harmonically sophisticated enough that we can consider that on par with other Western music. So I always just assumed that the bias that I had anecdotally encountered as a music librarian was just related to the music's history itself, of being kind of biased in how it's been studied. And then after becoming aware of this concept of search engine bias, kind of started digging a little deeper. And ultimately, this chapter kind of represents just an evolution in my thought process and an evolution in how I approach instruction sessions, to where now a section on talking about bias is part of, most of my classroom instruction sessions that I would do, as I may talk about search strategies and databases that students could use to help them out. I'm also going to incorporate bias into this discussion as well. Like I said, I had encountered a lot of examples that I had just found over the years, and then, and sort of found workarounds for dealing with that. And I do want to go ahead and say, though, this is sort of constantly changing. I can think of examples, I think even examples that made its way into this chapter that I've since found don't behave the same way now. I use an example in the book of protest music. And I had found over time that used to, if you did a search for protest music, you were usually geared right towards Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, that era of American protest music. But, protest music could encompass a wide array of other things, going back 100 years in this country. But I found that since the search results for protest music have gotten better. So this is something that changes over time. I'm cynical enough to kind of think that bias and discovery engines will I mean, it's always going to be present because humans are always going to bring their biases to the table. But that's what led to the writing of the chapter about identifying and overcoming it, right? I mean, we may not be able to always change it. But as Dyani said at the beginning, it's the trying part that's important, right? So by teaching people how to identify and overcome it, you're at least trying to make the system better. So anyway, Leslie, Colleen, and I wrote this chapter. We talk about, bias in search engines. We talk about, the sort of secrets behind vendor algorithms and relevance rankings. We don't always know exactly how their formulas work. But, we ultimately go on to kind of outline a few examples of these that we found. I use the examples of protest music. We have Tim Keller talked in the session on Tuesday about Library of Congress search headings, and of course we're all aware of the problematic nature of some of those. Alien being kind of a classic example that can tend to gravitate towards looking at undocumented workers, but it obviously means a lot of other things. Coincidentally, the alien thing is what sort of how I develop my way of what I talk about in the chapter of using limiters is a good way to kind of circumvent bias that I talk about in the chapter. Because I found with Alien, if you after you get your search results, if you use limiters and filter by subject, you can usually see like how the search engine swayed there and which direction it's going. And it's like with Alien, for example, you would see that there was legal things, undocumented workers, biology even, right? Because of like alien species and things. And you had to, in my case, the example I was looking for the science fiction type alien, right? And you had to get way down in the results to go that route. But I talk about in the chapter about how you can kind of overcome some of the search engine bias that you'll see by looking at the subjects that you can filter by, and that can kind of help you get around some of that as well. But really, the large part of our chapter was just wanting to make people aware of this thing, that this does exist. Because if I was unaware of search engine bias originally, obviously your students are. And that's why I want it to be, I encourage people to make it part of instruction sessions because, the user behavior of students, the fact is, they're not going to dig down deep enough always. They're going to be unaware that the search results they're seeing are biased, and they may just give up. So that's why I think it's important to incorporate this discussion into instruction sessions, just to sort of spread the word and teach people ultimately to be more information literate. And with that, I guess I'll close. I guess we're out of time. I looked at this 1:30.
Yeah. So if people want to stick around for like a couple minutes, I've got a few closing remarks, and maybe there's one question we can get to in the chat. There's not any Q&A right now, but we'll see in a sec. I just really want to highlight how hard all of our authors worked for every single one of the chapters in the book. They're incredible, and they all have applications for the reader, for more references at the end of the chapters, for guideposts and deeper understanding, questions to ask, tools for assessment. Creating all of these resources is so far from easy. Just like round of applause to all of you again. We really hope that users of the book engage with the discussion questions and the further reading. There's just so much contained in this volume that can really create change and new conversations for music librarians and how they approach both teaching, creating space, and their own understanding of the topics in here. Sophie, thank you again for having us and the work that you do to share the cutting edge publications of Library Juice Press. It's really been a privilege. So thanks all.